There are many different kinds of meditation, and within the vast realm of meditation, there's what we can call mindfulness, which is the same as, for the most part, insight or vipassana meditation. Then there's mindfulness light, like mindfulness-based stress reduction. But within the Buddhist universe, mindfulness is basically a translation of the word vipassana. Insight's another translation of it. And mindfulness basically means paying attention to what's going on with concentration or focus, and sensory clarity, meaning you know what's happening. You're actually aware that if you're...
Did you say clockwise or counterclockwise?
Counterclockwise. Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, it's probably time to turn it off. If it gets too warm in here, we'll all fall asleep. And
sorry to interrupt.
That's no problem. So paying attention to what's going on with concentration or focus, with clarity, meaning the ability to discern in each moment what's actually happening in your senses, like if there's thinking or if there's body sensations, if there's sound, if there's images in the mind, if you're seeing something. That's what I mean by knowing what's happening. And then with equanimity. And equanimity means not interfering with what's happening. In other words, when we have experience, we often either like the experience and want more of it, in which case we'll try to hang on to it, or we don't like the experience and we want to push it away and avoid it or repress it or deny it. And if you pay careful attention, you'll notice that in each moment, there's usually with our experience, there's either this grasping, wanting more of it, or pushing away because we don't like it, some way of contracting or reacting, or there's neutrality, and if there's neutrality, then we tend not to pay too much attention to the experience at all. We tend to just space it out. We tend to pay attention to things we don't like and things we do like, and then we don't notice the rest. Does that make sense? You know, so that's mindfulness. It's just paying attention to what is without trying to change it. So again, this is one kind of meditation. And that's usually, for the most part, that's what's taught in insight or mindfulness or vipassana meditation classes or retreats or whatever. But there is another kind of meditation. And so if you remember, the third part of mindfulness is equanimity, not trying to change it, allowing it to be exactly how it is, and opening ourselves, being vulnerable to exactly how things are. But there's another kind of meditation which is also in traditional Buddhism, which balances mindfulness, which is basically a practice designed to develop wisdom. In other words, knowing exactly what's happening. That's the beginning of wisdom. But there's also a meditation that's part of most Buddhist traditions, which is trying to create positive, trying to create more of what we want. So we're not then allowing things to be exactly as they are. We're actually trying to make them more of exactly how we want them. And you can call that focus on positive, or the traditional Buddhist term is Brahma Vihara. And Brahma is divine, like heavenly, or wonderful, or, you know, very desirable. Desire in a good sense, not the bad kind of desire in Buddhism, which is grasping and craving. That's just what we all want naturally. We all naturally want happiness. We all naturally want love. We all naturally want peace and ease. We all naturally want health. Every animal every being wants the things that I just said. So that's not like a bad desire, it's not craving. That's just how we're built, to want those things. So there's meditation to try to create those. And so Brahma Vihara, Brahma is the divine, and then Vihara just means house, or abode, or place that you are. So you could translate these practices either in terms of creating or focusing on positivity, or you could call it something more flowery like divine abodes. Mm-hmm. Okay, whatever you like. They're both kind of nice names, nice ways of viewing it. So what we're going to do in the first part of this, some of you signed up for the first half, some of you signed up for both. Hopefully you'll want to stay. It'll be good. You'll you want to hang with the group until May. It's fine if you don't, but we're going to kind of do this in two parts. So the first part is the Brahma Viharas, positivity, and then the second part will be a deeper dive into mindfulness and wisdom practice. So I just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork for what these two practices are, and they very much complement each other. They're very much, in some ways you could say each of them is incomplete without the other, and you could also say in the deepest way of practicing either of them, it starts to create the other. So very deep Brahma Vihara practice leads to increased mindfulness. Very deep mindfulness practice will eventually develop the Brahma Viharas. But we can go about it in a much more direct way, and that can be very skillful. And also, a lot of people find these practices to be very enjoyable and very helpful, extremely helpful if you're in difficulty. So these two practices can also be looked at as two different strategies for if things get difficult. Now, difficulty isn't the only reason to practice them. We could all use more positivity. We could all use more love. We could all use more forgiveness. We could all use more happiness. We could all use more gratitude, right? It's not like, oh, my life is good, so I don't need to be grateful. You'll actually enjoy the goodness if you can incorporate gratitude and connection into it. And we'll talk quite a bit more about that. But in terms of strategies for when things get difficult, and I don't know, has anybody here gotten through your life so far without any difficulty? I don't think so. So when things get difficult, there are several different meditative strategies that can be efficacious. And one is mindfulness, where we just break it down into its component parts and we pay attention to it with equanimity. And that builds a certain kind of seeing through, disidentification, freedom, all of which we could call wisdom. And it becomes sort of an empowering way of putting difficulties in perspective and making them less ominous, making us less identified with them, so that our sense of life is separate from the difficulty rather than all glommed together with it. So that's the mindfulness approach to dealing with difficulty. But there's also this Brahma Vihara approach, or creating positivity approach to dealing with difficulty, which is sort of the other direction, equally powerful and equally useful, which is, here's difficulty, and we tend to focus on it and get really consumed by it. But we can just direct our attention to something positive. And we can give ourselves compassion, we can give ourselves forgiveness, we can give ourselves love, we can give ourselves a certain space or freedom that's separate from this. And then this then gets contextualized in a context of, well, there's also this positive that's here. And And that also goes with how we relate to difficulties that other people around us are having. So these practices aren't just directed to ourselves, they're directed outward. And they become very relational. So they can become heart-opening. They can become practices of non-separation or oneness or connection. And that can be very liberating. We can become less identified with me and more just living in space or living in love. So 2 different strategies. So the first 8 weeks of this, we're going to work on the Brahma Viharas, and the first step in that journey will start next week, and we'll start with forgiveness. Because if we're going to let love flow and we're holding on to I'm this and that and you're this and that and I'm not good enough and you're not good enough and all that kind of stuff, that's an obstacle. And forgiveness practice directly challenges that obstacle and starts to work away at it. So we start with forgiveness, and then we'll move on to metta. How many of you have heard the word metta? Yeah. So metta is usually translated as loving kindness or loving friendliness. And this is an incredibly natural feeling that arises in us. Think about you see a bird, or you see a squirrel, or you see a baby, or you see a little puppy, and just that kind of feeling that comes up, that just this sort of well-wishing or love or just, it's kind of a yummy feeling. So everybody, can you contact that feeling? It's not that hard, right? So that's metta. This is like the most natural thing in the world in certain circumstances, right? But what we want to be able to do is cultivate it ultimately and eventually in every circumstance. So, yeah, you can feel metta for a little puppy, but when there's a big growler and he's jumping at the fence and going, "Rawr!" and you kind of go, "Oh!" and then what do you feel back to the dog then? Or to, more difficult, to your kid or your spouse or your parent or your boss or your employee, or when they growl at you. When somebody gives you a hard time. And then we go back into and then how quickly can we rebound into metta, into that sort of well-wishing. Metta doesn't mean that there isn't conflict. It doesn't mean that there isn't things to work out. It doesn't mean that there can't be anger or there can't be other emotions. But our stance, our fundamental stance towards other beings, when it's not metta, we get poisoned. And the world gets poisoned. I mean, I don't need to tell you about the lack of metta in the world. Gets worse every day. So we'll start with metta for ourselves, and we'll talk a lot about that. And then we'll move on to metta and learn how to extend it out to other beings, including maybe beings that we don't like. And then from there we'll move into compassion. And compassion is how we treat our own suffering or the suffering of others. So metta is very much for everybody and for all beings all the time, not just people. But compassion is sort of the response that we have to suffering. So it's a sort of a particular flavor of metta, if you will. But compassion is a very powerful way to meet our own suffering or the suffering of people who are close to us or people who are just out there. And after compassion, we'll go to the flip side, which is our response and relationship with positive stuff. So when positive stuff is happening for other people, how do we respond to that in a really good way? It's not, I'll give you a hint, it's not jealousy or envy or regret, comparison. It's called mudita, which is the joy that we feel at the good fortune of other people or other beings. So if you can learn how to do mudita, it's really cool because you get free happiness from what's happening around you, rather than somebody has something good happen and you're like, why not me? It's like, oh, good on you, and then it makes you happy, and you didn't have to do anything. They had to pay for the trip and go take it, and all you have to do is go, oh, I'm glad you had a great trip. So that's mudita, and then when good stuff happens for us, gratitude. And gratitude is a way of recycling good stuff, because if you're grateful, then you're happy. It's not if you're happy, then you're grateful. Mm-hmm. Lots of people are happy and they're not grateful, and their happiness goes away too fast. But if you're grateful, it makes you happy again. And then at the end of this, then we'll go back to equanimity, but in a different way. So there's a certain kind of equanimity as a way of meeting life. That's actually a very, very beautiful and powerful way to be happy. Taking what's called the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows and just letting it be life. Knowing that it's all going to happen. And having a way of being with it where it just is. And we're okay. So that's the sort of the Brahma Vihara curricula. And we practice them all very similarly, and we'll talk about that next week. So the way of practicing is similar for all of them. So the direction and the content is different, but the actual practice is very similar. So at first the practice can feel clunky like anything new, but if you get used to it and you go deeper with it, then it becomes very supportive and kind of a nice place to hang out. So there'll be lots of time to learn how to hang out, and these practices, even though they sound different, can actually feel in some way very similar, because the mechanism of practice is similar. And then in the second half of the group, if you're here for that, then we'll go back into mindfulness, and we'll work on wisdom practice and developing clarity and equanimity in particular. So that's the sort of the arc of the group. Does anybody have any questions about that? Yeah, right.
I maybe misunderstood the word metta before, but I thought that was gratitude.
Gratitude. Mudita, sympathetic joy. I don't even know what the Pali word for gratitude is.
Oh, okay.
But metta is loving kindness or loving friendliness.
It makes more sense now.
Yeah. Gratitude is not an official Brahma Vihara. And neither is forgiveness. So typically if you just look up the 4 Brahma Viharas, the official ones in the traditional Buddhism, it's metta, and then karuna, which is compassion, and then mudita, sympathetic joy, and upekkha, which is equanimity. And those are the 4. But when I've been teaching this now for years, I like to start with forgiveness. Because some people can't get to metta because there's too much holding on of, you know, whether it's blame or judgment or trauma, and there needs to be some kind of healing of that, of opening of that before metta can flow. So I find forgiveness to be really useful for a lot of people. And then I've also found that the idea of sympathetic joy and the good fortune of others always felt incomplete to me because, well, what about my good fortune? Because when we wish, you know, when we wish for, well, what's the most appropriate response for my own good fortune? Well, it's gratitude. So to me, that balances the sympathetic joy and makes it a more complete practice. So I add those two. But I don't know what the Pali word is for them, because I'm not a very good scholar of that stuff. Yeah, Sophia?
This is not very related to the specific topic, but is it like in school where you have to raise your hand and ask to go to the bathroom, or?
No. Nope.
Lovely, so you just go.
Just get up and go. If you need to take a walk, if you need to use the restroom, get tea, get water, just do it.
Thank you.
Johann, you said the mechanism for practice is the same. What do you mean by that?
Well, we'll get more into it next week, but basically we're working with a combination of phrases, visualizations, and generating emotion. So that's the mechanism. So we'll be working on all three of those, and the more of that we can summon, the more powerful the practice. So everybody's capable of repeating phrases. Most people can do visualization. Not everybody, but most people can. And oftentimes people can generate emotion. Not everybody can do that either. But everybody can do phrases, and then the other two are encouraged. So that's the mechanism of practice, or the structure of it. Yeah. And again, we'll don't worry about that this week. We'll get into that next week. Did I see a hand? Yeah, Mike.
Can I ask you, what's the connection between meditation and yoga?
That's a great question. In a nutshell, because there's probably a bookshelf that would talk about that. So one is meditation is integral to almost most spiritual traditions. There has some form of meditation. But at least Buddhist meditation started in India. And it came out of the yoga culture, the yoga tradition. So yoga predates Buddhism by thousands of years. And yoga, although now if you go to the gym at the rec center and do yoga, it doesn't seem like it. Yoga started as a very deep spiritual practice that incorporated very high levels of mindfulness or meditation on body. And it really began not as a way of exercising or stretching, but it really began as a practice of spiritual development, spiritual awakening. So a very, very tight correlation there from India.
But we're not going to practice yoga.
Here?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Mm-hmm.
No. Anybody else have any questions?
So missing the class is not a problem. You repeat things. You just go over it shortly again, or
if you have to miss a group, and we really encourage this, as Tinda said, come if you're home and you're not sick. I mean, if you're away, you're away. Or if you have a sick kid, maybe you can't come. But otherwise, if you're not in the mood, come. If you don't have the energy, come. If you feel like there's something good on TV, come. Okay?
but I will be away next week.
If you're away, you're away. So one thing is there'll be a recording of the instructions, so you can listen to that. And each week I will, or one of us will teach a new practice, okay? And then we'll do it, and then we'll discuss it, and then the following week we'll talk about our experience with it sitting for the week and do a review. So there'll always be a review the following week of whatever was done the previous week. So I think if you have to miss a group, you won't be like completely in the dark. You'll come here, hopefully listen to the tape, and then try it for yourself, and then there'll be a review in the sharing and the Q&A.
And I can share with her, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That gives me more practice.
Yeah. Yeah, and you guys can sit together. Any other questions? Good. So tonight, I thought that we would just do a very simple mindfulness practice, and then next week we'll start in with forgiveness. And so you're welcome to do any practice that you want this week, but if you don't have something that you regularly do, I would recommend right now that we just do a simple breath meditation, which is the most simple, but also very powerful mindfulness practice. And basically you can pay attention to the breath at the tip of your nose or in the belly, whichever you feel more connected to, and just watch the breath. Don't try to control it or change it. Don't try to make it do anything. Just notice each breath, the in breath, and then breathing out as a physical sensation. So you can feel the air coming into your nose right here, and then the air going out of your nose right here. Or you might feel that your belly is rising and falling with the air coming in and out. So you can just, make a decision about that. And just pay attention to it. Don't try to change it. If you have thoughts, you're going to have thoughts, okay? So the idea of meditation isn't to get rid of your thoughts. And thoughts doesn't mean I can't meditate. That's like the biggest misconception about meditation. People say, oh, I can't meditate, I think too much. Well, that's what your brain does. So a healthy brain is going to generate thoughts, just like a healthy stomach generates digestive juices. The stomach secretes digestive juices, the brain secretes thoughts. The difference is we don't take our digestive juices personally. We don't believe them. We don't get lost in them. We don't get enthralled by them. We don't turn them into an identity. That's the problem with thought, okay? So the thoughts will come, that's fine. Don't pay too much attention to them. Don't believe them. As soon as you realize you're thinking, bring your attention back to the breath. Just bring it back. Gently come back to the breath. And you just do that over and over without any fuss or judgment. So that's a very simple practice. Does anybody have any questions about how to do that? Yeah, Sophia.
Is there ever a point where you stop thinking while you're meditating, or no?
Sure, that can happen. And then your first thought is going to be what?
Wow, I'm not thinking.
And then you'll go, oops. Yes. So, yeah, when that happens, that's generally the first thought. Oh, wow, I didn't think.
Can you be so relaxed that you fall asleep?
That can happen too. And the biggest antidote to falling asleep is posture. And Tunde's going to talk a little bit about posture, so that because it's tricky. We're in a nice, comfortable place. It's after dinner. It's 8 o'clock, and it can be sleepy time. And so that's going to happen. You might get sleepy, and then here's how you don't get sleepy.
Yeah, I've gotten sleepy many times to the point where I almost fell over. So what we want to do is adopt an erect, but at the same time a relaxed posture, right? So that we can be comfortable for a longer period of time, 15-20 minutes for as long as we're meditating. And we want to have our head, neck, and back aligned vertically as much as possible, right? To let the breath flow freely. And you can choose to sit on a chair or on a cushion. So if you're sitting on a chair, try to not lean back on the chair, but sit straight, and so that your back is self-supporting, and your feet are touching the ground. And if you choose to sit on a cushion, you can either sit with your legs crossed, or you can put one of your legs closer and the other one drape it in the front. It's ideal to have your knees touch the ground. It promotes a more comfortable sit. So if you find yourself sitting with your knees like this, try to raise yourself 3 to 6 inches. That might help lower your knees. Also, you could knee. I don't see anyone kneeling here, but you can try this and put a pillow underneath your buttocks and just do this. But as a summary, just try to have your head, neck, and back aligned and the shoulders relaxed. And do something comfortable with your hands, right? You can either put them on your knees, or you can put your left palm over the right fingers, left fingers over the right fingers, and your thumbs slightly touching. So, and if you find yourself like dozing off, then reinforce the posture, like direct back, relaxed shoulders, and hopefully it will help.
Great. Yeah, if you're leaning back against the wall, or a back jack isn't necessarily the best way to meditate. You want to try to support your own weight, not against something in back, and that tends to keep us more relaxed, and it's actually more comfortable once you get used to it. And it will certainly help you be more awake. If you start to fall asleep, reinforce the posture, take a deep breath, and then you can also open your eyes. So when you open your eyes, don't start looking around, just kind of look down at the floor, the rug, and keep a very soft focus so you're not really looking, but your eyes are open, and that light might help keep you more alert. But other than that, you can generally meditate with your eyes closed or open, depending upon what you prefer. Any questions on any of this? Great. Okay. So we'll sit for about 20 minutes.